I never thought I would write something like this. Honestly, I used to laugh at people who posted their true horror stories on Reddit or in YouTube comment sections, claiming something haunted them, or that they lived through some supernatural nightmare. I always thought, if this really happened, why would you write about it instead of going to the cops, or a therapist? But here I am, doing exactly that. I guess when you're desperate for answers and the police can't help, and the doctors can only tell you to get more rest, you start turning to strangers on the internet for some kind of validation. I need to know that I'm not insane. I need to know if anyone else in New York, specifically Brooklyn, has experienced what I went through on Flatbush Avenue. It started 2 years ago, right after the pandemic. Rent in Brooklyn had dropped just enough that I could actually afford my own one-bedroom apartment for the first time. It wasn't glamorous, peeling paint, thin walls, a weird smell in the hallway that never really went away, but it was mine. My little piece of the city. The building itself was old, probably early 1900s, with the kind of heavy wooden doors and creaky staircases that made it feel like you were stepping into another era. But the location was great, and at first I thought I'd gotten lucky. I moved in on a cold March afternoon. The first strange thing happened that very night. I was unpacking boxes and noticed something scratched into the wood of the closet door in the bedroom. It wasn't graffiti, exactly, more like desperate, uneven letters gouged in with something sharp. "Don't sleep here." My stomach dropped when I saw it. I laughed nervously to myself, telling myself it was probably some bored teenager, or a previous tenant trying to be edgy. Still, I grabbed some duct tape from my moving box and covered the words up. I didn't want to look at it. The first week passed quietly, except for the dreams. Every single night, I dreamed of a man standing at the foot of my bed. He never moved, never spoke, just stood there. His face was blurry, like when you try to take a picture but the camera lens won't focus. But I always woke up with the same sick feeling in my stomach, heart pounding like I'd just been chased. I told myself it was stress, that moving to a new place could mess with your head. Then, around the second week, I started hearing noises in the walls. Scratching, dragging, sometimes even faint whispers. I complained to the landlord, thinking it was mice or maybe a leak in the pipes. He just shrugged and said, "Old buildings make noise. You'll get used to it." But I didn't get used to it. If anything, it got worse. The noises were loudest around 3 a.m., and sometimes I swore I could hear my name being whispered. I would sit up in bed, straining my ears, the whole apartment silent except for my own breathing, and then, a faint hiss. "Daniel. That's my name." One night, I decided to record the sounds on my phone. I set it on the nightstand, voice memo app running, and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I listened. For the first 10 minutes, nothing. Just my breathing. Then, around 2:47 a.m., the recording picked up a faint dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I knew it wasn't me, I was dead asleep. Then, a voice. Clear as day, right into the microphone, a woman's voice I didn't recognize. "He's coming." I dropped my phone in shock. I replayed it over and over, hoping it was some glitch, some interference, but no. It was there. My skin crawled. I called my mom later that day, trying to laugh it off, but she immediately got quiet and said, "Daniel, you need to get out of that apartment. Don't mess with this kind of thing." My mom is superstitious. She grew up in a small town in upstate New York where everyone believed in ghosts, so I brushed it off. But in the back of my mind, her words stuck. Things escalated in April. I came home from work one evening and noticed that my closet door was wide open. I knew I had closed it before leaving. Inside, the duct tape I had slapped over the scratched message was peeled off, crumpled on the floor. And beneath it, I could see that someone had added more words, carved deeper into the wood. "Don't sleep here. He watches." I felt ice in my veins. I ran out into the hallway, half expecting to find someone messing with me, but the place was dead quiet. No one was there. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of prank, but the locks hadn't been broken, and no one had a spare key except my landlord. I asked him if he'd gone into my unit, and he looked at me like I was crazy. Why would I go in there? You keep calling me with complaints, kid. Maybe you should look for another place if you're not happy. I didn't sleep that night. I kept every light on, sat on the couch with my laptop playing old TV shows just to drown out the silence. At 3:12 a.m., the lights flickered, and every single cabinet in my kitchen burst open at once. I jumped so hard I nearly hit my head on the wall. I slammed them shut, my hands shaking, but within minutes, they creaked open again, one by one. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on my coat and walked out into the freezing night, wandering Flatbush Avenue until dawn. From then on, I dreaded going home. But rent was cheap, and moving again so soon felt impossible. I started crashing at friends' places, making excuses. I told them my apartment had a mold problem, or that I was waiting for the exterminator. Anything to avoid telling the truth. But one night, I don't even know why, I went back. Maybe it was pride, maybe exhaustion, maybe just stupidity. I was tired of running. I told myself, if something happens tonight, I'm catching it on camera. Proof. I set up my phone again, propped it against a stack of books, facing the bedroom. I turned off the lights and lay in bed, heart racing, pretending to sleep. Hours crawled by. At 3:09 a.m., the closet door creaked open by itself. I forced myself not to move. The door opened wider, slow, deliberate, until it was fully ajar. Out of the darkness, a hand appeared. Long, pale fingers, gripping the doorframe. Then a man stepped out, blurry, just like in my dreams, his face unfocused, like reality itself didn't want me to see it. He walked to the foot of my bed and stopped. Just stood there, breathing. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I thought desperately. This has to be sleep paralysis. Then he leaned closer. His voice was a guttural whisper, like broken glass scraping against metal. You shouldn't be here. That broke me. I bolted upright, fumbling for the lamp, but the bulb exploded with a sharp pop, plunging the room into darkness. I ran, tripping over my own feet, crashing into the hallway. When I finally dared to look back, the apartment was silent. Empty. The next morning, I checked my phone. The video was gone. Just gone. Like it had been erased. The file name was there, but when I tapped it, nothing played. I moved out the same week. Left half my furniture behind. I didn't care. But here's the part that keeps me awake even now. Last week, I walked past that building on my way to meet a friend. The windows of my old apartment were wide open. And there, standing in the shadows of the bedroom, I saw him. The same blurry-faced man, watching me from the darkness. I don't know who, or what, he is. But I know this, he's still there. And if you're thinking about moving into an old apartment on Flatbush Avenue, near the corner with Church Street, please, for the love of God, don't. I've lived in New York my whole life, and like most people here, the subway is just part of my existence. You don't think about it much, you get on, you get off, you complain when it's late, you get annoyed at the weird smells or the guy playing music too loud. But you stop noticing the strangeness. It just becomes background noise. That's what makes what happened to me so disturbing. It wasn't background noise. It wasn't just another weird subway thing. It was something else, something that still makes my skin crawl every time I hear the screech of a train. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was still living in Jamaica, Queens. I worked late shifts at a hospital in Manhattan, and sometimes I wouldn't head home until after midnight. Usually, the E-train ran often enough that it wasn't a big deal, but on this particular night, service was messed up. I remember standing on the platform at 50th Street, bone-tired, staring at the digital sign that kept flashing delay. Next train, 18 minutes. It was after 1 a.m., and the station was nearly empty. Just me, a homeless guy asleep on a bench, and a woman scrolling her phone. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional buzz of the lights overhead. When the train finally screeched into the station, I nearly sighed with relief. I got into the second car, figuring it'd be emptier. But the car wasn't just empty, it felt wrong. The air was too cold, sharp enough to sting my nose, and it smelled like damp stone instead of the usual mix of trash and grease. The fluorescent lights flickered, humming faintly. I told myself it was just because it was late, that maintenance cars or older units sometimes got shuffled into service. I took a seat near the middle, pulling my hoodie tight, trying not to think too hard about it. The train pulled out, and almost immediately I realized something was off. Normally, between stations, you'd see the blur of tunnel lights flashing by. But outside the windows, there was nothing, just blackness. It felt like the train was moving deeper and deeper underground, into a space that wasn't even part of the subway system. A few minutes in, I noticed I wasn't alone. A man was sitting at the far end of the car. I hadn't seen him get on, but there he was, perfectly still, dressed in a long black coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of his face. His hands rested neatly on his knees, pale fingers clasped together. Something about him made my chest tighten. He didn't move, didn't look around, didn't even sway with the motion of the train. He just sat there, staring straight ahead. I tried not to look at him, pulling out my phone, but of course, there was no signal. The clock read 1:26 a.m. The train rattled on, deeper into the dark. At the next stop, if you could call it that, the train slowed and the doors hissed open. But outside, instead of a platform, there was nothing. Just rough stone walls, jagged and damp, like a cave. The fluorescent lights flickered harder, buzzing angrily. The man in the hat finally moved, tilting his head ever so slightly toward me. "You shouldn't be on this train," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like it came from deep inside the earth. Every hair on my body stood up. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The doors closed. The train lurched forward again. I wanted to run into another car, but something in me froze. It was like the air itself was pressing me into the seat. The man didn't move again, just stared. Stations passed that I didn't recognize. Some were completely dark, others had signs with letters that didn't look like English, or any language I knew. Once, I saw a group of figures on a platform, tall, thin, hunched in unnatural ways, their faces pale blurs. They turned toward the train as we passed, and though the glass between us should have separated sound, I swore I heard them whispering, 100 voices hissing all at once. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, my hands numb. I looked down at my phone, desperate for some anchor to reality. The time read 3:02 a.m. Had I really been on the train that long? It should have been a 40-minute ride at most. Then the man in the hat stood up. The sound of his shoes on the floor echoed too loud, like we were in a cathedral instead of a subway car. He started walking toward me, slow, deliberate. Panic surged in me. I jumped up and bolted for the doors between cars, shoving them open. I stumbled into the next car, empty. No seats, no ads, just bare metal walls. I turned back, the man was already there, stepping through the doorway, his face still hidden in shadow. I ran again, through another door, another car. Same thing. Empty. Each time I looked back, he was closer, though his movements never seemed rushed. Just steady, unstoppable. By the fifth car, I was sobbing, pounding on the windows, begging for the train to stop. Outside was still nothing but endless black. The overhead lights buzzed and flickered until finally, with a violent pop, they all went out. For a moment, I was in complete darkness. Then, one dim light flickered on above me. The man stood only a few feet away. I could see his face now, except there was nothing there. Just smooth, pale skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I collapsed to the floor, shaking. He leaned down, so close I could feel the icy air radiating off him. And though he had no mouth, I heard his voice, clear and sharp in my head. "You don't belong here. Get off before he notices." The lights snapped back on. The train screeched, slowing. I looked out the window. This time, I recognized the platform. Jamaica Center. My stop. The doors opened, and I didn't hesitate. I bolted out, stumbling onto the platform, gasping for air. Behind me, the train doors hissed shut. I looked back, expecting to see the man, but the car was empty. Completely empty. The train pulled away into the tunnel, the red taillights shrinking into darkness. When I finally staggered upstairs into the cold night air, I checked my phone. The time was 1:47 a.m. I'd left Manhattan at 1:26. 21 minutes. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And now, every time I ride the subway late at night, I can't help but watch the other passengers. Because sometimes, just for a second, I think I see someone in a long black coat and wide-brimmed hat at the far end of the car, watching. Waiting. I've always thought of Manhattan as the heart of the world. It's where ambition lives, where dreams come to be tested, and where, if you're lucky, or ruthless enough, you can carve out a little empire of your own. For years I'd been clawing my way up the corporate ladder, taking every overtime shift, every miserable client meeting, just to prove myself. And then, like fate had finally decided I'd paid my dues, the promotion came. Along with it, a fat raise and the chance to finally move out of the cramped Hell's Kitchen studio I'd been suffocating in for years. I thought it was the start of my new life. Instead, it was the beginning of something I can barely bring myself to talk about now. The apartment was on Riverside Drive, up near the 90s. It was in a pre-war building, the kind of place with gargoyles carved into the facade, heavy brass doors, and a lobby that smelled faintly of polished wood and old money. The listing had felt too good to be true, a penthouse unit at a price that, while steep, was strangely affordable compared to anything else in that neighborhood. When I asked the realtor why it wasn't higher, she gave a shrug and said, "Some places just sit on the market, you know? People are picky. Too many stairs, old plumbing, whatever." She smiled, but her eyes flicked toward the corner of the lobby like she was looking for something. At the time, I didn't think much of it. The penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, a balcony big enough to host parties, crown molding that whispered of another era. I signed the lease without hesitation, practically dizzy with the feeling that I'd finally made it. My friends came over the first night. We drank champagne on the balcony, the city glittering below us like something out of a movie. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what I've been working for. But the shine wore off quickly. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Manhattan apartments are never truly quiet. You always hear the hum of traffic, sirens in the distance, someone's TV, or music bleeding through the walls. But in that penthouse, the silence was suffocating. At night, I would lie in bed, straining to hear something, anything. And that's when I realized it wasn't really silent. There was a sound, low and steady, just at the edge of perception, like a whisper you couldn't quite make out. It wasn't in the walls. It wasn't outside. It was in the apartment. The second week, things got stranger. I woke up one night to find the balcony door wide open, curtains billowing in the wind. I knew I'd locked it before bed. Heart hammering, I shut it and double-checked the lock. The next morning, I found wet footprints leading from the balcony to my bedroom. Long, narrow footprints, like someone had been standing barefoot in the rain, then walked straight toward my bed. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself I must have left the door open, maybe I'd spilled something. But the laughter felt hollow. Then came the elevator incident. One evening, I was heading up with a neighbor from the third floor, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a little dog. As the doors closed, she glanced at me and asked, "You're the new tenant in the penthouse?" I nodded. Her expression tightened. "You should be careful up there," she said softly. "Why?" I asked, half smiling, waiting for some joke. But she just shook her head, clutching her dog a little tighter. "That place, it doesn't like to be lived in." Before I could press her, the elevator doors opened on her floor, and she hurried out without looking back. That night, the whispering grew louder. I could almost make out words, though they were distorted, like a radio tune just off frequency. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was the wind. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement near the balcony door. A figure, tall, gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long, stood silhouetted against the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, and it was gone. I barely slept after that. I started noticing other things, too. Shadows that didn't match the light. Cold spots that lingered even in the warmth of summer. Once, I woke to the sound of my own voice whispering in the dark, though my lips weren't moving. I recorded the audio on my phone, desperate for proof. When I played it back the next morning, my stomach twisted. The recording captured my voice, yes, but it was saying words I'd never spoken. A phrase repeated over and over. He watches from the river. He watches from the river. He watches from the river. I wanted to move out, but pride kept me there. I told myself it was stress, that I was overworked, overtired, imagining things. I kept going to the office every day, pretending everything was fine, while inside I was unraveling. Then one night, it escalated. I came home late, the city drenched from a thunderstorm, the Hudson swollen and roaring below. I stepped into the lobby and noticed the doorman staring at me oddly. His usual polite nod was absent. Instead, he asked, "Are you sure you're feeling all right, sir?" "Yeah," I muttered, brushing past him, too drained to care. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors finally opened, the hallway to my penthouse was dark, every light bulb blown out. My phone flashlight trembled in my hand as I made my way to the door. I slid the key in, turned the knob, and froze. Someone was inside. I could hear them breathing. Slow, rasping, deliberate. I pushed the door open. The apartment was dark except for the glow of the city lights through the windows. And there, by the balcony, stood a figure. Tall, emaciated, skin slick like it had been soaking in water for days. Its head turned toward me, though I couldn't make out a face. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The thing raised its hand, pointing toward the Hudson River glittering beyond the glass. And then, in a voice that sounded like mine, but older, hollow, decayed, it whispered, "He is waiting for you." The balcony door burst open, though I hadn't touched it. The roar of the river filled the apartment. The thing lunged, and suddenly I was on the balcony, the cold wind whipping around me. I don't know how I found the strength, but I shoved backward, slamming the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. The figure stood outside, staring at me with eyes that were nothing but empty sockets, water streaming from its body as if it had just climbed out of the river. It didn't try to break the glass. It just stood there, watching. I left the apartment that night and never went back. I paid the penalty to break the lease, packed my belongings in daylight with 2 friends by my side, refusing to spend another night there. Even now, in a smaller, safer apartment downtown, I can't look at the Hudson without shivering. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear the whispering. He watches from the river. I grew up in the Bronx, and like most kids in the city, I had my fair share of dares, dumb adventures, and nights spent trying to prove I wasn't afraid of anything. Back then, fear felt like a game. You'd go into abandoned buildings, sneak into construction sites, or tell ghost stories on rooftops. We laughed at danger. We thought nothing could touch us. But that was before the hospital. There's an old building off Westchester Avenue, not far from where the 6 train rattles overhead. Most people don't even know what it used to be. Some say it was a children's hospital, others swear it was a psychiatric ward that shut down after some scandal in the 70s. Whatever the truth is, by the time I was a teenager, it was just a hulking shell, its windows boarded up, its doors chained, graffiti covering every inch of the outside walls. To us, it was the perfect place to prove how brave you were. The dare was simple: spend an hour inside, alone. No phone, no flashlight, just a lighter or a candle if you needed one. If you made it out, you earned bragging rights. If you chickened out, well, you'd never live it down. I was 17 when I finally took the dare. My friends egged me on, chanting my name, shoving me toward the rusted gate. The October air was sharp, carrying the smell of rain and decay. I laughed it off, pretending my stomach wasn't twisting with dread. "Fine," I said. "An hour. I'll even bring back a souvenir." They boosted me over the fence, and I landed hard on cracked pavement, weeds poking through the concrete. The hospital loomed above me, its outline jagged against the cloudy night sky. I found a gap where the boards had been pried loose from a side door and squeezed inside. The smell hit me first. Rot, mold, and something metallic, like old blood. My lighter flickered to life, casting a weak circle of light. The walls were peeling, graffiti tags overlapping like desperate voices screaming for attention. The silence was oppressive, so heavy it pressed into my ears. I walked through long, dark corridors, the floors littered with debris. My lighter's flame danced, throwing shadows that seemed to twitch just out of sight. Old wheelchairs and broken gurneys lay abandoned, their wheels frozen in rust. In one room, I found a row of tiny beds, metal frames bent and twisted, stained mattresses collapsing under years of dampness. Children's toys, headless dolls, a cracked plastic truck, were scattered across the floor. I remember shivering, even though I told myself it was just junk, just time erasing the place. The whispering started around the 30-minute mark. At first, I thought it was wind sneaking through cracks in the boarded windows. But the sound was too clear. Too deliberate. Words. "Come play." My heart nearly stopped. I swung my lighter toward the sound, but the hallway was empty. My breath came fast, white puffs in the cold air. I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then it came again, closer this time. "Come play." A child's voice. I wanted to run, but my pride pinned me in place. My friends would never let me forget if I bolted early. So I pressed forward, deeper into the hospital. That's when I found the stairs leading to the basement. Something in me screamed not to go down there. The air that drifted up was colder, thicker, carrying that metallic tang of blood even stronger. But my feet moved anyway, like I was being pulled. Step by step, the darkness swallowed me. My lighter flickered, the flame guttering like it wanted to die. At the bottom of the stairs was a long corridor lined with doors. Most hung off their hinges, but one at the very end was closed. Carved into the wood, deep and ragged, were the words, "They never left." My skin prickled. I should have turned back, but I pressed my hand against the door and pushed it open. The room beyond was enormous, far bigger than it had any right to be, stretching into shadow that my lighter couldn't touch. Rusted hospital beds lined the walls, and shapes slumped in them. My heart slammed against my ribs as I realized what I was seeing. Bodies. Dozens of them. Pale, shriveled, their faces hidden in shadow, but their chests were moving. Rising and falling, slowly, like they were breathing. I staggered back, choking on a scream. My lighter slipped, clattering to the floor, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for it desperately, fingers shaking, when a chorus of voices erupted around me. "Stay with us." High and low, men and women, children and the elderly, all speaking in unison. "Stay with us." I found the lighter, flicked it on, and froze. Every single figure in those beds was sitting up now, their heads turned toward me. Their eyes glowed faintly, milky white, like blind pupils reflecting the flame. Their mouths opened, impossibly wide, teeth jagged and too many. I ran. I didn't care about the dare, about my pride, about anything but getting out. I tore through the basement, up the stairs, down hallways I barely recognized, the whispers chasing me, growing louder, more frantic. "Stay with us. Stay with us." I burst through the side door and collapsed outside, gasping for air. My friends were waiting, laughing, ready to tease me. But when they saw my face, pale and drenched in sweat, their laughter died. I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the building, my hand shaking violently. They helped me over the fence, and we ran without looking back. For weeks afterward, I had nightmares. Dreams of lying in one of those rusted beds, my chest rising and falling in time with the others. dreams of voices whispering in the dark, urging me to stay. And every morning, I'd wake up with the taste of rust in my mouth, like I'd been breathing the hospital air all night. Years have passed since then, but I still can't walk down Westchester Avenue without feeling eyes on me. The building's still there, boarded up, forgotten. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I see lights flickering behind the broken windows. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, you can hear it too. The faintest whisper, carried on the wind. Stay with us. I was born and raised in Manhattan, and like most New Yorkers, I thought I knew the city inside out. The crowded streets, the smell of roasted nuts from corner vendors, the endless wail of sirens echoing through the avenues, it was the soundtrack of my life. But what happened to me 2 years ago made me realize just how little I really knew about the place I called home. Beneath all the glitz and the skyscrapers, there are layers of this city people never talk about, forgotten, sealed away, abandoned. And one of those layers nearly cost me my sanity. I worked as a freelance photographer, mostly capturing street scenes, forgotten architecture, and anything that screamed old New York. I had a fascination for things the city tried to hide, the alleys, the ruins, the abandoned corners people pass by without noticing. That's how I first heard about the so-called ghost tunnels beneath Manhattan. They weren't officially on any subway map. According to whispers I found on obscure forums and old blogs, these tunnels were remnants of a failed subway expansion in the 1920s, sealed off and left to rot. Some people claimed they had snuck into them and found nothing but dust and rats. Others swore they had heard things. In early spring, I decided to track one down. It was stupid, I know that now, but back then it felt like uncovering a hidden treasure. I had been photographing near City Hall Park when I noticed an old, rusted gate half hidden behind scaffolding and weeds. A faint draft of cool air slipped through the gaps, carrying with it a smell that was old, damp, and strangely metallic. My curiosity got the better of me. Late one night, armed with a flashlight and my camera, I returned. The gate was unlocked, or maybe someone had already broken in long before. I slipped inside and found myself in a narrow staircase spiraling downward. The further I descended, the more the city above disappeared. The sounds of honking taxis and chattering pedestrians were replaced by silence, so heavy it pressed against my ears. My flashlight beam wavered over cracked tiles and graffiti-covered walls until I reached a platform, small, unfinished, with dust so thick it coated my boots. Tracks stretched out in both directions, swallowed by darkness. I should have stopped there. I should have turned back. But I couldn't. I started walking along the tracks, snapping photos as I went. The air grew colder, sharper, like I'd stepped into a freezer. At first, I thought it was just the underground environment, but then I noticed something unsettling. There was no dust on the rails themselves. They looked polished, as if they had been used recently. I crouched down to examine them when I heard it. A faint sound. Distant. The unmistakable hum of a train. My stomach dropped. That was impossible. This line wasn't supposed to exist anymore. But the sound grew louder, closer, until I felt a vibration under my feet. Heart pounding, I pressed myself against the wall, expecting a rush of wind and screeching brakes. Instead, the darkness ahead bloomed into a glow. And then, it came. A train, sleek and old-fashioned, its metal body gleaming like it had been freshly built. Its windows glowed with a sickly yellow light. It slowed as it approached me, the sound echoing off the walls until my skull rattled. My breath hitched as the train screeched to a halt right in front of me. The doors slid open. I don't know why I stepped inside. Maybe it was shock, maybe some unseen pull, but I crossed the threshold before I realized what I was doing. The interior was dimly lit, rows of red velvet seats stretching out before me. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I noticed the figures. Dozens of passengers sat silently, dressed in clothing that looked decades out of place, men in fedoras, women in fur-collared coats, children with ragged teddy bears clutched to their chests. Their faces were pale, their eyes sunken, and not a single one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the train itself. I froze, too terrified to speak, too horrified to leave. My flashlight flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw them all turn their heads, every single passenger, in unison, toward me. Their hollow eyes locked on mine. My blood turned to ice. The train lurched forward. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, fumbling for the door, but it was sealed shut. My breath came in ragged gasps as the train picked up speed, plunging deeper into the dark tunnels. I staggered down the aisle, desperate for another exit, when I noticed something that made my heart nearly stop. Each passenger looked familiar. At first, it was just a vague sense. But then I recognized one of the faces from an old missing person flyer I'd seen in the subway years ago. Then another, a woman whose face had been plastered across newspapers after vanishing in the 1980s. My stomach twisted as realization hit me. Every single passenger was someone who had gone missing in New York over the decades. Their faces stared blankly, mouths closed, as if they were eternally trapped in this metal coffin. The train screeched violently, and I was thrown against the seat. My camera clattered to the floor, shattering. In that instant, the lights flickered out, plunging the car into complete blackness. And then, whispers filled the air. They came from all around me, hundreds of voices, low and overlapping, chanting words I couldn't understand. My skin crawled as icy fingers brushed against my arms, my neck, my face. I screamed and pounded on the nearest door, my fists raw, until with a sudden hiss, it opened. I stumbled out onto another platform. But this wasn't the one I had entered from. No. This was something else entirely. The tiles were cracked, the walls were lined with strange, ancient markings, and the air reeked of rot. Behind me, the train doors slammed shut, and with a roar of metal, the ghostly machine vanished into the tunnel, leaving nothing but silence. I stood there, trembling, unsure what to do. The whispers hadn't stopped, they were in the walls now, in the very air. My flashlight flickered back to life, and in its weak beam, I saw something scrawled across the platform wall in a rusty, dripping substance that might have been blood. Welcome back. I don't remember how I got out. My memory is hazy after that point. One moment I was staring at the writing, the next I was back on the street near City Hall, the morning sun burning my eyes. My clothes were torn, my camera destroyed, and my hands were raw and bruised. Since that night, I've been haunted by the sound of that train. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I hear the faint rumble beneath the streets. And sometimes, when I'm waiting on a regular subway platform, I see it in the distance, the glow of those sickly yellow lights, the polished metal gleam. I shut my eyes, praying it passes. But deep down, I know the truth. It isn't a ghost train. It's real. And one day, it's coming back for me. My grandmother always warned me about old buildings in New York. She used to say the walls remember everything, every fight, every heartbreak, every scream, and sometimes those memories don't stay quiet. I never really believed her. To me, a building was just brick and mortar, nothing more. But that changed the year I moved into a tenement apartment on the Lower East Side. It was supposed to be temporary, just a cheap place to crash while I saved money. What I found there, though, was something that still keeps me awake every night, terrified that the walls around me are listening. The building itself looked like something straight out of another century. 5 stories tall, its bricks were blackened with soot and time, fire escapes twisted with rust, windows cracked and foggy with grime. It had been built in the late 1800s, during the wave of immigrants cramming into New York for work and survival. I figured it had character. That's what I told myself, anyway, when I signed the lease. The landlord, a gaunt man with thinning hair, didn't say much, only warned me not to go poking around the basement. I laughed it off. In this city, most basements are rat palaces anyway. My first night there was quiet enough. The radiator hissed like an angry cat, and the floorboards creaked whenever I shifted in bed, but nothing unusual. It was the second night when the noises started. At first, it was faint, a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor above me. But there was no one living upstairs. The apartment above mine was sealed shut, with boards nailed across the doorframe. I tried to shrug it off as the building settling. But then came the whispers. Late at night, as I lay half asleep, I would hear them seeping through the walls. Dozens of voices, low and hurried, overlapping each other. Sometimes they sounded like arguments, other times like sobbing. Once, I swore I heard a woman's voice screaming my name, though I had never told anyone in the building who I was. I'd jump up, flick on the light, press my ear to the wall, silence. Always silence when I checked. I asked the landlord about it a week later. He stared at me for a long time before muttering, "The walls, they remember. Best not to listen." Then he walked away without another word. That should have been my cue to leave, but I was stubborn, and rent was cheap. The nights grew worse. The dragging sounds above me turned into pounding footsteps, like someone running back and forth for hours. The whispers became clearer, almost like I was eavesdropping on conversations. One night, I heard a child crying softly, right outside my bedroom door. I rushed to open it, but the hallway was empty, shadows stretching long and thin in the dim light. Curiosity became obsession. I started researching the building's history. Turns out, it was notorious in its early days. In 1902, a fire ripped through the upper floors, killing 13 tenants who had been locked inside by their landlord to prevent them from leaving without paying rent. A few years later, the basement had been used as a makeshift morgue during a cholera outbreak. Decades after that, it was rumored to be a hangout for a violent gang, the kind that disappeared people who crossed them. The place had soaked up misery for over 100 years. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard the dragging sound again, louder this time, closer. My chest tightened as I realized it wasn't coming from above anymore. It was coming from the hallway outside my door. Against every instinct, I opened it. The hallway was pitch black, the single bulb overhead flickering weakly. And there, at the far end, something was moving. A figure, hunched, dragging itself along the floor. My flashlight caught glimpses of it, limbs bent at impossible angles, skin pale and sagging, eyes glinting like wet glass. It turned its head toward me, and I swear its mouth opened in a grotesque grin. I slammed the door shut and shoved my dresser against it, heart pounding out of my chest. The whispers erupted all around me, louder than ever, filling every inch of the room. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my skull now, screaming, crying, laughing. And then, silence. The next morning, the dresser was back where it belonged, as if it had never been moved. My door was wide open. My flashlight, which I dropped, was gone. I convinced myself it was a nightmare, until I saw what had been scratched into the wall beside my bed. Basement. I should have left. I should have packed my bags and run, but I needed answers. That night, I went down into the basement. The air was damp and thick with mold. My flashlight beam skimmed across crumbling walls and piles of junk until it landed on something that made my stomach twist, a row of old, wooden doors, padlocked shut. Some had numbers painted on them, others had names scrawled in faded chalk. The smell grew worse the deeper I went, a mixture of rot and iron. One door at the far end was slightly ajar. Against every instinct, I pulled it open. Inside was a narrow room lined with shelves. And on those shelves were dozens of small boxes, stacked neatly, each one labeled with a name and a date. I picked one up. It was light, almost too light. My trembling hands opened it, and inside I found a bundle of brittle, yellowed papers, rent receipts, eviction notices, birth certificates. And beneath them, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a single tooth. Every box was the same. Paperwork. Personal items. And always, a bone. The whispers began again, swelling until the walls vibrated. Shadows flickered in the corners of the room, and I heard footsteps rushing toward me from the hallway. I dropped the box, its contents spilling out, and ran. The door slammed shut behind me as I sprinted up the stairs, not stopping until I burst out onto the street. I didn't go back. I left everything in that apartment, clothes, furniture, even my wallet. I didn't care. A week later, when I returned to get my things with a friend, the building was gone. Not demolished, not boarded up, gone. In its place was an empty lot, covered in dirt as if nothing had ever stood there. I asked the landlord, but no one in the neighborhood knew who I was talking about. I asked about the building, but people looked at me like I was crazy. One old woman finally whispered, "That place burned down in 1902. Nobody's lived there since." I don't know what I stayed in. A memory? A curse? A ghost of a building that refused to die? All I know is, sometimes when I walk through the Lower East Side, I swear I see it again, just for a moment, standing there between two modern towers, soot-stained and waiting. And I hear the whispers calling me back. I never thought Central Park could feel terrifying. Growing up in New York, the park was always a place of freedom for me, families with strollers, joggers sweating through their morning runs, tourists snapping photos near Bethesda Fountain. It was loud, alive, buzzing with energy no matter the season. But one night, I learned the park had another side, one that wasn't printed on postcards or sung about in musicals. A side that wakes up when the fog rolls in. It happened 3 years ago, during the fall. I had just gone through a messy breakup, the kind that leaves you wandering the city at night because sleep feels impossible. That night, I ended up drifting into Central Park. It was past midnight, but the fog was so thick that the lamplights glowed like blurred halos, and the air was strangely still. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, like I had stepped into another world. I walked deeper into the park, past the familiar landmarks, until I reached the mall, the long, straight pathway lined with American elm trees that seemed to stretch forever. But instead of feeling calm, I felt uneasy. The fog was heavy here, almost suffocating, and for the first time, I noticed something strange. No sound. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, not even the distant hum of city traffic. It was like the park had been cut off from the world. That's when I saw her. A girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in the middle of the path. She wore an old-fashioned white dress, the kind you'd see in photos from the 1920s, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was dark, braided neatly, and in her hand, she held a small stuffed bear that looked worn and loved. She wasn't moving, just staring at me through the fog. I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to back away, but there was something about her, fragile, lost, that made me step closer. "Hey," I called softly. "Are you okay? Where are your parents?" She didn't answer. She just tilted her head, eyes fixed on me with an expression that was both curious and sad. I took another cautious step, and that's when I noticed the bear in her hand. Its button I was missing. My stomach clenched. I had seen that exact bear before, in an old article about a missing child case from the 1930s. I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But when I blinked, the girl was suddenly closer, only a few feet away. I hadn't seen her move. She just was. "Do you need help?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She opened her mouth like she was about to answer, but instead of words, a low, keening wail poured out, so high-pitched and sharp it felt like it drilled into my skull. The lamplights flickered violently, and the trees around us groaned as if they were alive. I stumbled backward, clutching my ears, and when I looked again, she was gone. Or so I thought. The wailing stopped, replaced by soft, muffled giggles. They came from all around me, echoing through the fog. I spun in circles, heart hammering, and caught glimpses of her, first behind a tree, then crouched on a bench, then standing far down the path. Always watching me. Always smiling. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran, crashing through the fog, desperate to find an exit. My lungs burned, and my chest ached, but I didn't stop until I burst out near Bethesda Terrace. I leaned against the stone railing, gasping, when I heard a soft voice behind me. "Don't leave me." She was standing right there, at the edge of the fountain. Her eyes glistened like wet glass, her dress fluttering though there was no wind. For a moment, she looked so heartbreakingly human, so lonely, that I almost stepped toward her. But then I saw the bear in her hand twitch. Its arm bent upward, like it was waving at me. That broke me. I bolted out of the park, sprinting down Fifth Avenue until I reached the safety of neon lights and honking cabs. I told myself it had to be stress, exhaustion, maybe even a hallucination. But the next day, curiosity got the better of me. I went to the library and pulled up old archives. It didn't take long to find her. Her name was Clara Whitmore, a little girl who vanished in Central Park in 1934. Witnesses claimed they saw her playing near the mall with her teddy bear, but when her parents turned around, she was gone. She was never found. The story might have ended there, but it didn't. Because a week later, I went back to the park during the day, just to prove to myself it had been a dream. The sun was shining, kids were playing, and it felt like the park I had always known. But when I reached the mall, something made me stop. There, nailed into the bark of one of the elms, was a small, weathered sign. On it was a black and white photo of a little girl in a white dress, smiling shyly at the camera, holding a teddy bear with one button eye. The caption read, "Have you seen Clara? Missing since October 1934." The paper was crisp. Fresh. I reached out to touch it, and the second my fingers brushed the corner, the park grew silent again. No birds. No laughter. Only fog beginning to roll in, slow and steady. And from somewhere behind me, a child's voice whispered, "Now you can't leave." If you've lived in New York long enough, you know the city hides entire worlds in plain sight. You can walk the same street for years and then one day notice a door you swear wasn't there yesterday. That's exactly what happened to me on 42nd Street, just west of Times Square, where neon lights usually drown out anything old or subtle. One rainy night, I stumbled across a hotel I had never seen before, even though I'd passed that block countless times. And walking through its doors was the biggest mistake of my life. I had just left a late-night shift at work and was cutting across the street, head down against the rain. The crowds were thinner than usual, probably because of the weather. That's when I saw it, a tall, narrow building squeezed between two modern towers. Its sign flickered weakly in the downpour, the Mayfair Hotel. The letters looked hand-painted, chipped, and faded, as if they hadn't been touched in decades. What struck me was how out of place it looked, like a relic from the 1920s that time had forgotten. The rain was relentless, and my umbrella had already broken in the wind. The glowing lobby through the glass doors looked warm, inviting, so I pushed my way inside. The air hit me first, warm but strangely stale, carrying a faint smell of cigar smoke and lavender perfume. The lobby was unlike anything I'd ever seen in Midtown. Heavy velvet drapes hung from tall windows, and crystal chandeliers glowed with a golden light. Behind the desk stood a bellhop in a crisp red uniform, his cap tilted neatly. He smiled at me with perfect politeness, though something in his eyes made me uneasy. "Welcome back, sir," he said smoothly. I froze. I had never been here before. I think you've got me mixed up with someone else," I mumbled. His smile didn't falter. "Your room is ready." Before I could argue, he handed me a tarnished brass key. "Number 503. My fingers closed around it instinctively, and in that moment, something strange happened. The noise of the city outside, honking horns, sirens, voices, vanished. It was like I'd stepped into a vacuum. Only the hum of the chandeliers remained. I should have left right then. But something about the place pulled me forward. Maybe it was the way the carpet muffled my footsteps, or how the air seemed thick with expectation. I rode the elevator up, its brass cage clattering as it carried me higher. The hallway on the 5th floor stretched impossibly long, lined with wallpaper the color of dried blood. My room was at the far end. Inside, the decor was eerily perfect, like a time capsule. A 4-poster bed with lace sheets, a heavy oak wardrobe, a vanity with a cracked mirror. The key slid out of my hand and landed on the nightstand with a soft clink. I sat down on the bed, listening to the faint hum of something, music, drifting through the walls. A jazz tune, scratchy and old, like from a gramophone. Then the laughter began. It started faintly, like a party far away, muffled by distance. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The sound grew louder, coming from downstairs. Curious despite myself, I followed it back to the lobby. But the lobby wasn't the same. Instead of silence, it was full of people, men in tuxedos, women in sequin dresses, champagne glasses clinking as they danced to a live jazz band. The chandeliers blazed brighter, the air thick with perfume and smoke. My jaw dropped. It was like I had walked straight into the roaring 20s. I tried to speak to one of the guests, a woman with a feathered headpiece, but she swept past me without even glancing, as if I didn't exist. I called out, louder this time, but no one acknowledged me. Panic began to crawl up my spine. Then I saw him. At the edge of the crowd, near the bar, a man was staring straight at me. Unlike the others, he didn't look like part of the party. He wore a plain gray suit, and his skin was pale, almost grayish. His eyes were hollow, his smile unnaturally wide. He raised his glass to me in a slow, deliberate toast. My stomach lurched. The music faltered for a moment, like a record skipping, and suddenly everyone stopped dancing. In perfect unison, they turned their heads toward me. Hundreds of eyes, blank and unblinking, fixed on me. The air grew heavy, suffocating, as the gray-suited man began walking through the crowd toward me, his grin stretching impossibly wide. I ran. I tore through the lobby, up the stairs, down hallways that seemed to stretch and twist. No matter which way I turned, the hotel didn't make sense anymore. Doors led to endless corridors, staircases looped back on themselves, and the numbers on the rooms weren't in order. My chest burned as I sprinted, desperate to find an exit, until at last I found myself back at room 503. My key still sat on the nightstand inside. The second I touched it, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was standing on 42nd Street in the rain, exactly where I had been before. The Mayfair Hotel was gone. In its place was an empty lot, chained off, with a coming soon billboard advertising a new luxury tower. My clothes were soaked, but my shoes and cuffs were coated in dust, like I'd been walking through an abandoned building. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, but when I reached into my pocket, I found the brass key. Number 503, still tarnished, still cold. That was 2 years ago. Since then, I've tried to throw the key away dozens of times. Trash cans, rivers, even once into the subway tracks. But every morning, it's back on my nightstand, waiting for me. And sometimes, when the city is quietest, I hear faint jazz music drifting from nowhere. Always the same song, scratchy and old, like it's daring me to come back. I've ridden the New York subway my entire life. I know the rhythm of the trains, the squeal of the tracks, the smell of wet metal and old paper in every station. I thought I understood it, the way the city hums beneath your feet. But there's one subway line no one talks about, one that doesn't appear on maps, one that moves through the city like a phantom. I stumbled onto it 2 years ago, and it's haunted me ever since. It started on a Tuesday night. I had been working late at my job in Midtown, the office empty except for the cleaning crew and the hum of fluorescent lights. I missed my usual train home, so I wandered toward the platform, yawning, wishing for anything but the endless commute. The station was nearly deserted, just a handful of people waiting, earbuds in, heads down. That's when I saw it, a train rolling in on the far track. Its paint was dark, streaked with rust and grime, and the number on its front was something I didn't recognize. No line I knew. I figured it was a maintenance train or a detour. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped onto the platform as the train screeched to a halt. The doors opened with a low, mechanical sigh, and inside, it was empty. No advertisements, no maps, just dim lights and the faint smell of ozone. I hesitated for only a second before stepping in. The doors closed behind me with a heavy thud, and the train lurched forward. It moved faster than any subway I'd ever been on, sliding silently through tunnels I didn't recognize. There were no stations, no stops, only darkness stretching endlessly beyond the windows. I pulled out my phone to check my location, but the GPS was scrambled, spinning in circles like it had no idea where I was. Then the passengers appeared. I hadn't noticed them at first, but as I scanned the car, pale figures emerged from the shadows. They wore clothes that looked decades old, 1940s suits and dresses, their faces pale and frozen. They didn't move, didn't breathe audibly, just stared at me with empty eyes that reflected the dim lights. My skin crawled. I wanted to leave, to run back to the platform, but the doors wouldn't open. The train stopped suddenly, but instead of a station, a faint glow appeared ahead, an underground cavern that stretched impossibly wide. Tracks ran in every direction, some spiraling upward, some vanishing into pitch black. The walls were lined with graffiti, scratched not with paint but with something that looked like dried blood. I could hear whispers now, echoing through the cavern, dozens of voices overlapping in a strange, incoherent chant. Panic set in. I ran down the aisle, looking for an exit, and that's when I noticed the other passengers beginning to move. Slowly, deliberately, they lifted their heads, and their mouths opened in unison, not to speak, but to scream. A sound so high-pitched, so piercing, it made my teeth ache. They didn't move toward me yet, but I could feel the weight of their gaze, as if the very air was pressing against my chest. I stumbled into a smaller car and pressed myself against the wall, trying to calm my shaking hands. The whispers grew louder, forming words now, faint but chilling. "You can't leave. You never leave." My flashlight, which I had miraculously kept, flickered. In its brief light, I saw shadows twisting along the walls, coiling like living things. When the light steadied, the passengers were gone. The seats were empty, but the air was thick, heavy, and cold, pressing against my skin like hands. The train lurched again, faster now, and I realized it wasn't following any normal tracks. The tunnels bent impossibly, angles defying logic, stretching for what felt like miles. I tried to open the doors again, but each time, they slammed shut instantly, trapping me inside. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time had no meaning in that train. The lights flickered, the whispers never ceased. I tried to mark the walls, carve something into the seats, anything to know I existed, but all traces vanished. My phone died, and even my own reflection disappeared from the windows. It was like the train had erased me from the world outside. Finally, after what I can only describe as an eternity, the train slowed. A dim light appeared ahead, different from the cavern, warmer. I ran toward it, lungs burning. The doors opened, spilling me out into a station I had never seen before. The signs were in a language I couldn't read, letters curling and shifting like smoke. A single escalator led upward, the faint sound of street traffic above. I sprinted up and emerged into a city street I didn't recognize, New York, but twisted somehow. Buildings were taller, darker, streets too wide, as if I had been spat into an alternate Manhattan. I ran until I collapsed in a doorway. My phone flickered on for a moment, and I saw the date. I had been gone 7 days. 7 days on a subway that shouldn't exist. When I finally returned to my apartment, everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. The shadows in my room stretched longer than they should, and sometimes, late at night, I hear the hum of a train beneath the city, always approaching, never stopping. I've tried to tell people, tried to post on forums, tried to find anyone who knows about the ghost line. No one has. No record exists. And now, whenever I enter a subway station, I can't help but glance at the far tracks, hoping it doesn't appear again, because I know that if I step inside, even by accident, I might never leave. The whispers still haunt my dreams. You can't leave. You never leave. I've always believed that New York is a city of dreams, but it's also a city of shadows. I learned that the hard way the year I moved into a luxury high-rise in Midtown Manhattan. My job had finally paid off, I had a corner apartment on the 52nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view that stretched from the Empire State Building to the Hudson River. On paper, it was perfect. The building was new, sleek, and equipped with every modern convenience you could imagine. But perfection is an illusion. The walls in that building weren't just walls. They had a memory, and whatever haunted them was about to make itself known to me. I moved in on a cold November day. The lobby was filled with the usual crowd, corporate tenants, a few celebrities I recognized from the news, and building staff who greeted everyone with mechanical smiles. Everything felt clinical, sanitized, and too perfect. My apartment was amazing. Expansive living space, high-end appliances, smart lighting that dimmed at sunset. For the first week, life was blissful. I would sit by the window at night, watching the city lights stretch endlessly, feeling invincible. Then the noises started. It began subtly, a faint creak here, a whisper there. I attributed it to the building settling. It's common in high-rises. I'd read about it in the manuals the engineers leave behind. But then the whispers became clearer, almost deliberate. They would start just as I was falling asleep, voices murmuring from the walls, my name, over and over. Sometimes it was one voice, other times dozens overlapping, chanting, laughing softly. The tone was playful at first, almost teasing, but underneath, I felt a menace that made my skin crawl. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress from work, or the isolation of living alone in such a tall building. But then things started to move. Small things at first, a lamp in the corner slightly rotated when I entered the room, my keys misplaced, the blinds drawn down in the morning though I was sure I'd left them open. I laughed nervously and blamed myself. Sleep deprivation, paranoia, typical New York stress. The first truly terrifying night came a few weeks after I moved in. I woke up around 2 a.m., gasping, as if I'd been drowning in a nightmare. Something was wrong. The apartment felt heavier, as if the air itself was pressing down. Then I saw it, a shadow, darker than darkness, standing in the corner of my bedroom. It didn't have a form, at least not one I could recognize. It was like a void, absorbing light, yet somehow solid, impossibly tall, and impossible to ignore. I froze. My mind screamed to move, to run, but my body betrayed me, locked in place. The shadow didn't approach. It simply stood there, waiting, observing. I could feel its awareness, like it knew every thought, every fear, every memory I had ever held. The whispering started again, filling the room. "You can see me, now." I screamed, and the shadow vanished instantly, leaving the room suffocatingly quiet. I spent the rest of the night wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, questioning my sanity. Over the next month, the occurrences escalated. I would wake to find furniture subtly rearranged. Mirrors reflected things that weren't there, faces that disappeared when I blinked, figures standing behind me only visible in the reflection. My apartment's lights would flicker violently, sometimes dying altogether. Most terrifying were the footsteps, soft, deliberate, pacing just outside my bedroom door. But when I opened it, nothing. No hallway, nothing. Then came the nights when I wasn't alone in my bed. I would awaken to a heavy presence leaning over me, warm breath on my neck that smelled faintly of smoke and decay. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even cry out. The whispers would fill my head, not through my ears, but directly, as if they were inside my skull. "You can't leave. You never leave." I started documenting it all, video, audio, even writing down everything I saw and heard. Friends told me I was crazy, that I was letting stress and isolation warp my mind. I didn't care. I had to find out what was happening. One night, desperate for answers, I set up cameras in the apartment. I slept fitfully, nerves raw, every shadow a potential threat. When I checked the footage in the morning, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the video, I was asleep, breathing steadily. The shadow appeared in the corner of the room, growing taller, reaching toward me. I tried to move, but my body was frozen. And then, the most horrifying part, the shadow split, one form leaning over me, the other reflected in the camera's lens, whispering words I could not hear but somehow understood. "You belong here." I panicked. I left the apartment for days, crashing at friends' places, hotels, anywhere but that floor. But when I returned, the apartment was different. The furniture had rearranged itself, subtly, in ways that matched the shadow's presence. The camera footage was gone. The key I had left on the counter disappeared, replaced with a small, black token, smooth, cold, with no markings, but heavy with something alive. I realized then that the apartment wasn't just haunted, it was alive. It remembered me, it followed me, and it fed off fear. I tried to leave permanently, sell the lease, even bribe the building management, but the unit was always occupied, always off limits, though no one could explain why. Friends refused to enter. Every night, I feel it in the apartment, whispering, pacing, watching. And the token? I keep it in my pocket now, because if I lose it, I fear I won't be able to return at all, or worse, that it will come for me elsewhere. And the truth is, I don't think it's confined to that apartment. Tall buildings, high-rises, old foundations, they remember. They watch. They wait. And sometimes, if you're alone enough, if you're tired enough, if you wander too close, they invite you in. I don't know how long I'll last. Sometimes, late at night, I can see the shadow in the city outside my window, stretching across rooftops, following me. And I hear it, whispering softly, almost lovingly. "You belong here. I will never be free." Not really.